we have a bit of a model at Montfort around how we kind of seen this crisis emerge, really. As you'll remember, sort of, was it 12 weeks ago now, we really were at the sort of the beginnings of the crisis. It was around immediate support. How do we kind of help deal with the issues that were so prevalent at that point? Essentially, getting people out of the workplace, and being able to kind of work remotely and putting the things in place that needed to be done to support that, or if it was around furloughing staff, or allowing staff to work in a more flexible way, trying to put the sort of policies in place, giving them the sort of the technology and the equipment that they might need to be able to work effectively from a different workplace. So that was the sort of the first part of the crisis. I think there was all of that kind of immediate support that was needed to deal with the workforce issues that we were dealt with. Immediately after that, I think we moved straight into the sort of team and well-being kind of side of it. So how do we kind of make sure that people remain engaged? How can we continue to share? How can we continue to collaborate in those different working environments? And I think what we've seen over the course of the last few weeks, and probably slightly longer, for many of the clients that we work with anyway, is that we've shifted to this sort of transition and transformation phase. So very much preparing about a phased return to work. So not everyone returning to work, and of course some people, particularly as I'm sure Natasha will touch upon, in some environments have worked right the way through this crisis. But we're now beginning to see, sort of accelerated planning and preparation around sort of big groups of workers coming back into the physical workplace, and what are the kind of the pitfalls and the challenges that relate to that, and how can we do it in a way that is of course safe. There'll be another phase that I guess might be the topic of a future conversation, which is around what happens when we've actually got lots of people back in the workplace, and maybe having a mix of people who are in the workplace and people who are still working from home. But that's maybe something we'll touch upon a little bit later in the session, and perhaps in a future session as well. So as I said, sort of 4 key trends that we picked out. First is around this reassurance on health and safety measures, and making sure that people feel comfortable that the right protocols are in place and that will be maintained. There's an increasing need to look at kind of workforce well-being and mental health, so ensuring that the right support is in place, but also that dialogue's being encouraged, that managers have the right tools and support to be able to have the right conversations with people who might be struggling as we go through the pandemic. I think there's a greater emphasis on leadership, and particularly as we move into this sort of transformation phase where organisations begin to look at the sort of shape and structure of their organisation. So whether there's going to be redundancies or looking at different types of operating models, that leadership is strong there, and that employees have been engaged appropriately and at the right time around some of the challenges relating to that transformation. And then related to that, it's about how those leaders set the tone. Can they kind of talk a little bit about the future and how the organisation is going to evolve, and indeed the contribution coming out of the pandemic that the organisation is going to make to wider society, which that sort of sense of purpose I think will become increasingly important.
The return to on-site working and how we manage that in the context of ensuring our staff feel confident and comfortable with our approach is so much more difficult than than leaving the premises was. Already lockdown has resulted in some really interesting changes in our culture. The bank is quite a hierarchical and conservative with a small c organisation. And often colleagues have felt quite restricted in what they can say to senior leaders, and that has broken down quite significantly over the last few weeks. For some reason, people feel so much more empowered by dialing into meetings, by public chats. So really simple things like not being in the quite gladiatorial confines of the big meeting rooms in Threadneedle Street has really supported a much more less hierarchical approach to the way that we're doing things. So we're doing a big piece of work at the moment on capturing the good things that have come out of lockdown, and how can that inform our future ways of working and our future strategic direction as well. I'd say the second big thing that's come out is about a much more openness and senior leadership visibility. Lots more senior leaders sharing quite personal stories of how lockdown has affected them in quite profound ways. And that's really had an impact, I think, on breaking down some of the barriers between senior leaders and colleagues throughout the organisation. What challenges are we facing? The biggest challenge at the moment, this is front and centre to me. Tomorrow we are going to be publishing our first significant communications setting out our return to on-site working and the gradual phased approach that we're taking. We have been communicating quite regularly about some key principles that we've set out about our return to on-site premises. That would be slow, gradual, and have colleagues' well-being and safety at its heart. But we're starting to now try to set out for people some sort of roadmap for when we think we'll be going back to normal. And one of the biggest challenges for us communications-wise has been balancing the competing needs of people who are incredibly concerned about going back to the office, particularly around challenges around childcare and public transport, versus a small but significant minority who are desperate to get back to the office for well-being reasons, for mental health reasons, and how we sort of square off that messaging in internal comms has been quite a challenge for us. I think moving into the future, a couple of things really starting to sort of we're starting to think about quite deeply. I think one is about inclusion in the broadest sense. So how do we ensure as we move more colleagues back onto on-site working that we don't inadvertently create in-groups and out-groups? So, you know, senior leaders, senior managers being back at the office, a sense that, you know, if you're not in the office, you're not playing a really, really important part. You're not present in the physical sense. So that's a significant issue for us. And then secondly, I think we are going to be a remote working organisation for some time to come. So what does that mean for the way we manage our organisation? We've had to go on a steep learning curve for remote management. It wasn't ingrained in the organisation at all. We're going to have to get better at this. And that will impact on all our key processes. Performance management is a really thorny issue for us at the moment, and how we're going to do that as we come up to interim review time. Where we really have struggled a bit more, some of our areas, is on the big policy debates. Actually getting in the room and thrashing out some of the big issues around, you know, our economic response has been quite tricky over the in a remote working setting. So I think there will definitely be things we will still need to do on site, and that sort of intellectual debate actually is probably one of them. But a lot of other stuff can be done from home, so why not? And in terms of our property strategy and all that sort of stuff, you know, that's in the end, that's going to be a significant saving for us if we can move more people into a home working environment. One of the sort of big messages that we've had from staff throughout this is that yes, there are challenges about working from home, but actually the benefits generally outweigh the negatives for them. You know, despite the sort of crisis situation, despite the lockdown, you know, they really have, you know, the long commutes, you know, the ability to be more flexible in their working patterns. So a lot of that is almost, in some ways, we've accelerated a path that we were probably on already about having more of a more flexible workforce and encouraging people to work from different settings. So I think we've just gone, we've missed out a few stages in a path we were on anyway.
So to reopen our sites, I think the most critical factor that we must not forget is to have in place good site leaders and good site leadership teams. They are crucially the ones that are leading this effort. No doubt they're on the ground. They're reviewing mitigation to ensure as far as practicable, it reduces risks, and also communicating with our colleagues on a regular basis. From my perspective, what we've done from a group or a central group guidance is to provide them with a checklist to support site leaders in implementing practical measures as they enter different stages of returning to work. And they are entering different stages of returning to work where, in terms of where they are in the world. The first phase that we've introduced is something called, which is it's basically when we allow to open by local government. And at this stage, most who can are still operating from home. The second stage builds on this, and we have in place more measures with not all, but the majority of our sites returning to work. And then the third stage is returning to normal operations with local restrictions being lifted and very few cases on a country-by-country basis. The group guidance and tech list has really helped with the practical execution for site leaders to allow their teams to return to work safely. It's also given them the confidence to be able to say that they're putting in the right measures. But in terms of engagements and support, two other elements that have really been crucial in terms of communicating and engaging with our site leaders and that of the entire business is firstly our divisional senior leadership team. And Sian mentioned this as well, but it's most important at a time during a pandemic that your senior leadership team are visible and they provide that reassurance to the leaders on the ground that they are doing a good job. Our CEO has been holding monthly briefings with our site leaders to communicate the high-level strategy and make sure that when it is cascaded, it is communicated and understood consistently across our operations. It's also been instrumental in providing that anchor that we need to remind our teams of our values and our strong sense of purpose, all of which will not change. His role has also been about ensuring that we're communicating the priorities for the business to deal with in the short-term business needs. So rather than, constantly reminding of the long-term strategy, there are priorities that we need to do whilst we have a short-term decline in some of our operations or within some of our key markets. Our regional vice presidents have also had a leading role to play throughout this time, and they've been holding monthly calls, reiterating the messages from our CEO, but also providing more details on how we can mitigate risk on a regional level. These sessions have been completely interactive and are broadly following a Q&A format so that we can understand what is concerning most our colleagues who are operating, on the ground. Secondly, this seems a very small thing, but we've established something called a site leadership forum, and all our site leaders are encouraged to share their best practice amongst themselves. This has helped them to work out practical solutions on the ground rather than having to escalate it to the senior leadership team. And it's been very well received because they can, it builds their confidence to say, this is what we're doing, take this and introduce it in your sites. To solve 3 pillars. So I can't say that one size has fitted all in terms of, we've had a perfect solution, and no, we haven't had all the answers, but just by instilling some group guidance and having general information and also putting in the channels, the appropriate channels to disseminate information consistently and constantly has helped our teams to see what is expected firstly of them as they return to work, and also what they should expect from us as a responsible business. So I think that's a crucial thing, and I think that's why you have to have a good site leadership team or a good site leader leader at every one of the countries, so that they can instill what is right for their country. So although that we are giving this group guidance, we are saying, this is your framework in which you can operate, but we essentially need you to operate within this framework as a basis, but please, consider what it's like within your own country and put in those measures. So that's why in terms of culture, what's been very interesting is the culture's been very similar. So the site leaders within their site leadership forum, which is completely engaging, they brought up the same issues time and time again, and they all actually responding to them in very, very similar ways. So yes, furlough, or they're coming in at different stages, and they may be furloughed, they may be, there are many, many different issues to consider. But when they get to that stage, they are taking advice from other countries, or they are looking at shared best practices. And I think, we do say one size doesn't fit all, and they do have to respond to their own, country guidance. But essentially, our site leaders have been looking towards each other for advice, practical advice, and installing it generally. So
At Slater and Gordon, we have been thinking for some time about introducing increased flexible working options for people, and then COVID propelled that thinking forward to a whole new way of thinking, and this has been significantly aligned with our investment in technology. We've moved our business onto the Microsoft platform. So we have a Microsoft managed desktop, and we've all got these Surface devices, and the business is fully on the cloud. So we're in a great position with our technology to do so. And during the lockdown, we paid a lot of attention to the employee voice. So we did a survey via our provider, the Happiness Index. And we wanted to focus on how people are doing now and how people want to see the business responding and innovating in the future. So what do you want? What kind of business do you want to work for, and what would be the best way of working for you? So we recently announced our new target operating model for the business, and part of that will be smart working. So it encompasses more than just working flexibly and working from home, but working in the best way for you, where you can be most productive, and working with technology in a smart way, and so on. So the people across the business are currently trying to understand what that means, and working together with their teams to think through what that could mean for them as an individual, and how that would work as a team in terms of the best kind of collaboration and the best way of working with their customers. So there's a bit of apprehension at the moment. So we're working through that because people don't quite understand what it could mean. I don't think they quite understand the range of flexibility that they would have, that they can still come into the office and collaborate and meet with their customers, and they're not going to be forced to work from home full time. There's no question of that. It's about choice and flexibility. So that's really exciting. And for us, in terms of innovating the future way of work, so we listened to what people said in our survey, and actually when it came back, it turns out that 80% of the business want more access to flexibility, and people want to work from home up to 70% of their time. So that's sort of 3 days a week out of 5. So that's that confirms what we're thinking. And so in the next phase, as we start to engage people with it, really we've got to look, and we know this, at how we move the business from managing through presenteeism, which is what we're all accustomed to. We're all comfortable in that space, to an outcome focused way of leadership and management. And I think if we don't get that right, that would be the biggest risk to this smart working proposition being a success. And we'll be working quite hard on getting that right.